Howdy mates, how are we doing? Here's a part 2 video over at the Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. Now I'm basically in the old growth forest portion of the sanctuary. So what I mean by that is this area has remained unlogged. It has not been altered in any way. So you figure this ecosystem that we're standing in has existed for thousands of years. And in addition, the Bald Cypress that we're seeing, they've probably been here even when, the Spanish explorers came here back in the 1500s. So with that being said, what's neat in particular that I want to point out with this Bald Cypress, you see like some of those swirling branches on the trunk of the tree. That's actually something called a Strangler Fig. Why it's called that is because of its behavior. So the Strangler Fig is like semi-parasitic, and what it does is, it finds root at the bottom, or no, it starts, somewhere along the tree, and it makes its way down, and then establishes root. And once it establishes root, sometimes what can happen is the Strangler Fig can obtain nutrients from the Bald Cypress, and thus it can eventually kill the tree. And that's really how the Strangler Fig gets its name, because in a sense it literally strangles the tree. And yes, your first thought may be, do they actually produce these little figs? You'd be correct, but they're actually really small. I mean, they're probably only like that big. I wish I could show you guys like one a little up close, but I really don't feel like getting off of this boardwalk, and even potentially getting in trouble for that. But what's very neat about the Bald Cypress too, that I've been pointing out, is they are a host tree to actually a very rare orchid that is found in Florida and even Cuba. It's actually something called the Ghost Orchid. And for those of you who have seen it before, congratulations, because they're very hard to find, and they're basically endangered. Because you figure back in the, like the 1900s, even the 1800s, orchids were highly exploited, mostly for monetary value. And oftentimes, ghost orchids usually establish themselves higher up in the tree. You figure probably at least 40 to 60 feet above the ground. Now, I believe it was 4 years ago. Yeah, it was in 2018. A team from National Geographic actually wanted to do a documentary based on the ghost orchid. And the point of the project was for the researchers to understand more about the orchid and what really pollinates it. For the longest time, it was believed that the giant sphinx moth pollinated the ghost orchid because of its long proboscis. However, though, during their footage, through filming and whatnot, they actually made another discovery. Instead, they actually found that another moth called a fig. God, I can't even pronounce it. The fig sphinx moth is actually the one who pollinates the ghost orchid. But then the giant sphinx moth, a separate species, they still go up to the ghost orchid. Sometimes they've been known to actually rob the nectar coming from the orchid itself. So it's really neat, by the way. And like I said, they are now extremely rare. I tried looking for some while I was here, but the thing is, they're not quite in bloom yet. It might still be later this month and even going into the next couple of months. So it's like you kind of have to be here at the right time. Here we go. Figured as a way to wrap up this video, this actually talks about something called Calusa. And this is actually one of the oldest bald cypress trees found here. And it just mostly talks about, you know, how it's host to the endangered ghost orchid, and how this tree could be quite a few thousand years old. But what's very neat that I've mentioned before with you guys is, you know, in this region of Florida, it's one of the only places where you will see both bald cypress and a royal palm standing right next to each other. And the thing is, that royal palm to the right is actually relying on a cypress knee to survive here. Because otherwise, the royal palm couldn't. Because as you can see, it's too wet. They like dry, sandy soil. So you may be wondering too, like the water, is it actually spring fed? Not necessarily. The water here is actually coming from rainwater. So you figure during the wet season, where it rains quite continuously for a couple of months, that water has a chance to accumulate here. And when that happens, that can actually change some of the variety of plants and wildlife that you find here. But once the rains stop and it approaches the dry season, the water has a chance for some evaporation, and the water levels may actually drop just a little bit. So, like right now, the water levels are a little lower as we speak. But you give it another couple of months or so, and those water levels will go right back up. And that is the characteristic of a slough. So, this is quite neat how this ecosystem can actually change, you know, quite quickly in just a matter of a couple of months. So, alright you guys, thanks for watching. Peace out.